I'm really an okay guy. I'm glad to see you feeling a little better. They tell me that all the weakness and disorientation should pass soon. That's just natural side effects of such an unusually long hypersleep, or something like that.
What do you mean? How long was I out there?
Has no one discussed this with you yet?
No, but I mean, I don't recognize this place.
No, I know. Okay. It's just that, this might be a shock to you. It's long.
How long? Please.
3 years.
What?
For the past several years, Apple has dedicated segments in their events about their new gaming initiatives. The release of Apple Arcade, support for Bluetooth game controllers, updates to their proprietary Metal Graphics API to support new features like ray tracing, mesh shaders, and other things. However, probably their biggest move, especially to those who live outside of their ecosystem, has been the announcement of major AAA games coming to their platforms. Oh my god, is that Hideo Kojima in the flesh at WWDC? Apple, ostensibly, wants everyone to take their gaming efforts seriously, but I don't think it's moved the needle much. Yes, mobile gaming is hugely popular, and in many parts of the world the default way people play games. However, mobile gaming hasn't flourished strictly because of Apple's efforts, but in spite of it. Today, I'm bringing this video to you because I am someone who, well, obviously is a gamer, someone who is also heavily invested in the ecosystem, and think they already have a decent foundation for a competitive gaming platform. I want to take the time here to outline why their gaming initiatives haven't panned out the way that they wanted to, and what they could maybe do to improve things. Apple Arcade is a subscription service where, for the low price of $7 a month, you can play a rotating selection of curated App Store games that are real video games and not free-to-play slot machines. The pitch to developers is very simple. The App Store is overwhelmingly oriented towards free-to-play games and microtransactions, so marketing niche premium games is very difficult. Apple Arcade offers a lot more visibility and stability to said developers by just giving them their own dedicated space where they can put their games out. Wait a minute. Wait, haven't we heard that from someone before? That's right, Jay. Apple Arcade is Apple's equivalent to Microsoft's Xbox Game Pass. And just like Xbox Game Pass, there is very little indication that it is a boon to either developers or Apple themselves. Some games are exclusive to the service, while others are titles that were released on other platforms. If you aren't heavily invested in the ecosystem, you probably aren't aware that Sega has released multiple spin-off titles that are exclusive to Apple Arcade, such as Sonic Dream Team, ChuChu Rocket Universe, or Puyo Puyo Puzzle Pop. Sometimes, once the exclusivity contracts expire, they'll be released on other platforms, as it happened with Shantae and the Seven Sirens, or Fantasian. Or, they'll be like ChuChu Rocket Universe, and it'll be delisted and gone forever. Thanks, Sega. Additionally, just like Xbox Game Pass, Apple Arcade's whole concept is something that actively undercuts the company. No games on Apple Arcade require an additional purchase, nor have any in-app purchases. This is a problem for Apple, not for users, because whenever you purchase an app or buy funny money to make your gacha pulls, they get a cut of that. If users aren't buying the application nor anything inside of it, where's the money being made? $7 United States can't possibly be enough to cover the 100, 200 plus games that they boast about, and that's assuming someone actually paid the $7 and not took advantage of the 1 or 3 month trials that they hand out like candy. When I bought a new Apple Watch, I signed up for the trial, played Sonic Dream Team, had a lot of fun, uninstalled it, and then canceled my trial. Apple has paid over $500 million in securing exclusivity deals with developers, but just like every other subscription service, the metrics on the game's performance are known only to Apple and not to the creators. The developer may theoretically have better visibility, but how can anyone make that call if Apple won't provide any meaningful feedback? How would you know if people are playing your game or not if the service provider won't say? Millions of people around the world have iPhones. Everyone in my immediate family has one except for my father, but how many people are actually subscribing to these services? Well, nobody except Apple knows, and the fact that they've barely mentioned it at all in their yearly events since its launch in 2019 suggests that there's nothing to brag about, and they don't have any idea what to do with it. Apple's WWDC, which stands for Worldwide Developers Conference, which is usually about software development, this year opened with a montage of new and existing shows and movies on Apple TV Plus, their video subscription service. Their pre-recorded events, their shows, their movies have playlists available on Apple Music. I know people who like their shows, like Ted Lasso, For All Mankind, or Severance. I saw Killers of the Flower Moon in theaters, and I loved it. That was a pretty good movie. I know people who have Apple Music, but I'm the only person I know who played Sonic Dream Team, and I'm not the only Sonic fan I know. No one is playing these games. I like the games on Apple Arcade, but the service is like the equivalent of selling the pipes in your house as scrap to pay for the water bill. These games would probably do better if Apple was actually willing to promote them, or better yet, if their creators moved to another platform. But that doesn't matter now. It seems like they're more interested in courting the AAA market. Which brings us to the next problem. When Infinity Blade released back in 2010, it sold the idea that console-like graphics can work on phones. It wasn't anywhere near a 7th gen AAA game, but the fact that it was closer than its contemporaries was more important. It was incredibly popular, it got 2 sequels, a book series, and it laid the groundwork for Epic Games' eventual foray into the mobile service game industry with Fortnite. Fast forward many years later, and now we have actual current AAA games releasing on iPhone and iPads in addition to Macs, and it hasn't made a difference. Chasing AAA games has gotten Apple headlines, but AAA games, in my opinion, are completely pointless for their devices, and it's not just because of graphical fidelity, though that does play a part in it. Firstly, console games and handheld games have entirely different design philosophies, partly because of the differences in hardware, but also because of the differences in the context in which you are playing them. Console games are played in environments where you're comfortable and sedentary, while handheld games are played while you're actively in the middle of something else. Console games are designed for you to sit back, relax, spend many hours playing, while mobile games focus on shorter, bite-sized sessions that can fit in between moments of your daily life. Death Stranding is not a game that you just pick up, play for 3 minutes on the train, and just leave idle, nor was it ever designed with that in mind. It's not enough to just take console games and slap them on a phone. You have to actually get games that were made to be played on the go. Now, you can argue that most of these AAA games were being advertised for the Mac and not for the iPhones, and Macs have much better hardware and can be easily used at home. Would that fix the problem? I don't think so, because of the fact that AAA games are massive. The file sizes of AAA games have continued to balloon over the past decade. The outrage over Titanfall being around 40 gigabytes feels quaint when games today can easily push into the triple digits. While being able to upgrade and expand storage space on consoles and PCs have made this problem somewhat digestible, none of Apple's products allow for expandable storage. Whatever storage you have is whatever you have. My M1 MacBook Air is capable of running these games, sort of, but because I, A, only have 512 gigabytes, and B, bought this for a billion other things aside from gaming, I couldn't try out Resident Evil 4 Remake because I didn't have enough space. This problem is made worse by the fact that storage upgrades on any Macintosh are eye-wateringly expensive. 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte upgrade options on any configuration are an extra $200 to $600 respectively, on top of the grand that you're paying for the computer already. It doesn't matter that much that I can play Baldur's Gate 3 on my Mac if I'll be losing a quarter of my space, and I'm not getting rid of whatever photos, music, or videos or documents that I have just for this one game. Nobody's going to do that. Okay, but what if you're like Mr. or Miss Moneybags and dropping a few grand for a beefed up Mac Studio is just a week's worth of lunch to you? Well, if you can drop that kind of money for a souped up Mac, then you probably already have a PlayStation or PC desktop that outmuscles it for a fraction of the cost. Sure, Resident Evil 4 can run on an iPhone, but it actually only runs on an iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max. If someone can afford a Pro model phone or tablet or a $1,000 computer, then they can just as easily get a console or a PC that the game was actually designed for and have a way better experience. I can't play Resident Evil 4 Remake on my iPhone 14 Pro, despite the generational leap not being that wide. Do I find that very annoying? Yeah, I do. But it doesn't matter because I have a PS5 and a gaming PC. I don't care. This ties into the last reason these games don't make sense here. Apple Silicon chips, which are the name for Apple's custom processors used across all their devices, are not engineered to be computational powerhouses. They are engineered to be efficient. iPhones and Macs aren't the most powerful machines in the world, but the reason why they're popular is because they're very good at doing the most basic, everyday things without sucking up a lot of power. Most of Apple's products are portable in nature, and those devices, no matter who makes them, are at their best when they're lightweight, when they last long, and when they don't heat up in your hands. If you have ever used a gaming laptop or held a Steam Deck, you know firsthand the compromises you have to make for power. A lower overall battery life, constantly being tethered to a wall charger, loud fans, and a bulky and heavier form factor. Enthusiasts are more than willing to accept these drawbacks, but most people won't. Simply put, AAA games are very expensive to make. They are very expensive to buy. I mean, if people won't purchase a $10 game on the App Store, why would they drop $40 or $60? They can't run on a wide range of hardware. They require too much work for the developers to optimize, and honestly, no one who's playing on mobile devices cares about maximum graphics anyways. The games that are the best fit for Apple devices are cheaper, lower fidelity games designed from the ground up for phones or handhelds. Now, this one is a major long shot because it runs almost entirely against what Apple is and has ever been, but if there's something that would help, it would be ensuring that older games can be played on modern Apple devices. Apple is notorious for enforcing the future by any means necessary, even if it means creating friction and leaving huge swaths of their legacy behind. People to this day give them flack for courageously dropping headphone connections, but that hasn't been nearly as catastrophic, in a way, in my eyes, as their dropping of 32-bit support on macOS and iOS. Tons of software and critically acclaimed games, such as the aforementioned Infinity Blade trilogy, are unplayable on modern systems. I remember when Valve made a huge effort in the 2010s to bring their titles in Steam to macOS, but the only game of theirs today that's playable is Dota 2. Everything else, the Orange Box, Portal 2, CSGO, etc., is no longer supported or unavailable. If a developer didn't make the transition to the 64-bit future, that application is stuck in the past, and they don't make it easy to roll back to old OSs or emulate that software. Now, to be fair, this issue isn't exclusive to Apple. delisting, backwards compatibility, and preservation have increasingly become major concerns as gaming machines are more reliant on fragile internet services. The difference, however, is that consoles have physical media and homebrew efforts that can extend the life if and when official support ends. Maintaining compatibility isn't always perfect on PC either, but there are communities of Windows and Linux users who are constantly working to make broken, busted games from the past better, both officially and unofficially. On the flip side, Apple's operating systems and hardware have never been easy to modify and have only gotten harder to do so over time. Apple Silicon Macs can't use Boot Camp, an installation tool that allows you to install Windows on Macs, nor are there any viable, stable Linux distributions that can be booted. There are ARM-based versions of Windows and Linux distributions, but specific things between how Apple Silicon is designed and a reluctance on other distributors to bend for said proprietary hardware are massive hurdles. Asahi Linux is an attempt to reverse engineer Apple Silicon chipset drivers and security into the Linux kernel, but it's going to be a long time until that's stable enough for daily driving, let alone gaming. I think there are absolutely more people in the world who have MacBooks than Linux machines, but it is very hilarious and kind of sad to look at Steam survey stats and see, no, Linux is beating them out. People on Linux care about games, and people on Windows care about games. There are enclaves of Mac users who would love to make the platform more hospitable to games, but Apple themselves need to actually let people care for those games if they won't. In a lengthy Facebook post from 2018, world-renowned tech wizard John Carmack had noted his experiences with Apple's co-founder, CEO, reality disruptor, and alternative medicine expert Steve Jobs during his time at id Software. Carmack had great respect and admiration for Apple and their products, but frequently butted heads with getting Jobs to care about video games, who simply thought it was a distraction and not worth investing in. I'm not going to tell the whole story in this video, but I'll link it below. The reason I bring it up is because that attitude towards gaming has persisted with the company over a decade after Jobs' passing. Apple's gaming strategies today are confusing and half-hearted and will continue to be so for two main reasons, I think. One is that they have no real pressure to perform, and two, to really succeed in some areas requires them to compromise in others that they deem more valuable. If Apple Arcade actually became a huge hit with their users, that would condition them to not buy things, which is not what they want. And if Apple opened up their hardware just a teensy bit, that would make it too easy for users and developers to bypass their app stores, which also they don't want. And while Apple may be shrewd and intentionally isolationist from the rest of the industry, that doesn't mean that they aren't paying attention. They very obviously have seen Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft dump billions of dollars into the gaming industry with almost nothing to show for it, and imagine that that can very easily happen to them. I have seen several pundits argue that Apple should be more aggressive with Apple Arcade like Microsoft has been with Xbox Game Pass, which is a strategy that would only make sense if Xbox was actually very profitable and not in a $80 billion hole, dead last in console sales, and had some of the worst PR I have seen in years for a console maker. Instead of doing all of that, Apple has decided to kind of ignore the gaming industry and let others deal with it, or just let it atrophy on their home computers for decades, to the frustration of many, but not in any way that matters financially to them. They have plenty of other niches to cater to. Macintosh has weathered the crushing dominance of IBM clones and Wintel PCs by embedding themselves into specific markets like graphic design and digital art production, which are markets that they still dominate today. Software developers mostly use Macs out of necessity, but since it's Unix derivative, it shares a lot of DNA with the massive genealogy of Unix-like systems, that is, things like Linux, Android, literally any operating system not made by Microsoft. Thus, many tools in the general learning curve are cross-compatible for users that are experienced in one or the other. Fun fact, very early development kits and demo units for Xbox 360 games were PowerMacs due to both platforms using PowerPC processors. Apple has also remained a fixture in education in the United States for generations. From the Apple II's ubiquity in public schools in the late 70s and 80s, Macintosh and Next workstations in universities in the 90s, all the way up to iPads in the hands of every grade schooler today. I definitely remember public libraries in my city having Macs available around the turn of the millennium, and all of the arts programs at my high school, that is, photography, music, yearbook, and school paper programs in the late 2000s, were all using Intel-based iMacs. Apple wasn't associated with gaming, but they didn't care because they felt most of their customers didn't care. Though the reason they've tried to become more proactive in this industry now is what I alluded to at the very beginning. Gaming has flourished on their platforms not because of them, but in spite of them. That, I think, bothers a lot. They know that people love video games. They know that it's an industry where there's a lot of money to be made, but they know that if they were to take a more active role, they would have to compromise. And Apple doesn't like to compromise for anyone. Not for phone carriers, not for Epic Games, and not for the FBI. Even if they have to be dragged kicking and screaming to do something that would actually benefit people, they will find the most passive-aggressive way to weasel out of fully committing, such as allowing sideloading, but only in the European Union. Apple services are increasingly becoming a major area of profitability for the company, but you can't have that without the hardware to go with it, which is also, and has always been, very profitable. Could Apple make a console? Probably. Do they want to be a loss leader for an indeterminate amount of time with zero guarantee of total, absolute domination over incumbents who've been doing this for way longer? No, I don't think so. I would love to see more developers, especially indies, offer support for Macs via Steam, but I don't blame them for skipping it entirely. It's not why I bought my MacBook, and I don't lose a bit of sleep over it. Apple is very different from their rivals, but they suffer from the same strain of arrogance. They think that just because they have a lot of money and branding power, that it'll be more than enough to carry them to success. That everyone will simply gravitate towards them by sheer physics, and they won't have to try at all. Until, of course, each and every single one finds out the hard way that you do, in fact, have to try. Apple is not in any real danger and won't suffer much, but they need to meet people halfway, gamers and developers alike. Or just don't. Be willing to compromise, or just stop talking about it. Nobody likes having their time wasted.